Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week, we have a look at the 2023 film Godzilla Minus One. This is episode 421. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So, warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, publisher at Castle Bridge Media, home of the Castle of Horror anthology. With me from Austin is Tony Sabaccio, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. Also in Austin, Mr. Drew Edwards is the writer-creator of the long-running underground comic Halloween Man, which you can find at Global Comics. He is a Best Writer Ringo nominee, Austin Chronicle Best of Austin Award winner, and a member of the PEN America Fellowship. Say hello, Drew.
Like a prehistoric dinosaur from a nightmare.
Excellent, excellent. And finally, also in Denver, color commentary from Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. All right. Godzilla Minus One is a 2023 Japanese kaiju film, directed, written, and with visual effects by Takashi Yamazaki. It's produced by Toho Studios and Robot Communications, distributed by Toho. It is the 37th film in the Godzilla franchise. It is Toho's 33rd Godzilla film. It's the 5th film in the so-called current Reiwa era, which I will look to Tony to explain. And this particular film, and I did not know this going in because I refused to learn anything about it because I know I was going to watch it anyway. So I walked in, and it turns out it took place entirely right after basically in the close of World War II and in the post-war era. So it's an entirely 1940s Godzilla, which was kind of new. This film has done very well. It grossed $35 million against a $15 million budget. $15 million being a little south of 10% the budget of the last big Godzilla movie, which was Godzilla vs. Kong. It is getting really good reviews, and we all saw it like in the first weekend. So let's get our opening thoughts. We'll go Drew, Tony, and Julia, and then we will get into the conversation. So, Drew, opening thoughts, Godzilla Minus One.
So this very easily cracks my top 10 Godzilla movies. I think this is the scariest Godzilla movie I have at least seen in a while, but maybe ever. It's my favorite film that I've seen in the entirety of 2023. I think it is not only an excellent monster movie, but just a great movie all around. The acting, the music, and honestly, for the budget, the special effects, very impressive. This is the first Godzilla movie that I think that I could probably watch with my parents because there's a strong sort of epic historical romance vibe to it as well. I think the main character being a sort of rogue kamikaze pilot was a fascinating choice. I also really like the idea of throwing Godzilla into this era of Japanese history, because you have the reality of a country that really didn't have a military having to deal with the problem, in which case is Godzilla. It's my favorite contemporary Godzilla design, easily. Like we did Shin Godzilla, I think, a few weeks before the release of Godzilla vs. Kong, and I know a lot of people really like the Shin design, but I hated it. And I thought the spike lasers and the tail lasers were pushing it a little bit too far. Like, it didn't really feel like Godzilla to me. This solidly feels like Godzilla, but while also being extraordinarily terrifying with a lot of images that are just pure nightmare fuel. Particularly the scenes of it pursuing the boat were scary to me. But just a really impressive movie. I hope people that aren't even normally fans of giant monster films or Godzilla in general will still check this out, because this is just top tier filmmaking here. Like this is the first Godzilla movie that I think probably, and at least in modern times, that like I think this deserves to be an Oscar contender. I thought this was amazing. So that's how I'm starting us out. I'll be interested to see how everybody else felt about it. But to me, this was a 10 out of 10 movie, to use our 10 shot glasses, to use the monster movie happy hour vernacular. I thought this was a near perfect movie.
I'd love to hear what they're going to say about it, by the way, because I find it amazing that those guys love movies possibly more than we love movies, but they grade hard. Like even the stuff that they love, they're like, yeah, it's a 60, And so I can't wait to find out what they'll give this. So all right, Tony. I mean, you're probably the biggest Godzilla fan I've ever known. So were you happy watching this? Like, what
Oh
are your opening
yeah,
thoughts?
it's hard when something's hyped this much. Like I'd heard good things, and it's really good when it absolutely deserves the hype. It's a great movie. It's not just a monster movie. Although I saw somebody saying like, oh, it's not a real horror movie, and like, okay, sure, whatever. I don't want to get it.
Tell that to the sailors that got bitten in half.
We can bring that up. Like,
but anyway, but that aside, I mean, it has layers upon layers of context that the first movie tackles some of it, but you couldn't even 9 years after the war, it's so fresh that you couldn't really tackle some of that, and there's enough text and there's enough subtext in 54 Godzilla, especially the original Japanese version, that is impactful and says a lot. And I think we talked about it when at the time, for theater goers there, hearing air raid sirens 9 years after, that had to be terrifying in itself, right? There's a lot, and we don't, I've seen a lot of people say this is the best Godzilla movie, and I can see why you would say that, but also like contextually, it is really hard to place it ahead of 54 because that's the progenitor of everything, right? So that's a tough one, but wow, is it just amazing? And we could talk. I do want to, I think it's worth talking about the budget a little bit, because while it is impressive, it's also not exactly comparing apples to apples when you compare it to like an Avengers budget, or what you name it, whatever the blockbuster budget is. It's a little bit different. There's some nuance to it that I've been reading about. And again, this is all my own secondhand information, like just kind of digging around to kind of. But
it's so funny.
People have been pointing out, I mean, it's interesting in not that, and none of it detracts, but it contextualizes some things. But yeah, I was just so Rain saw it with me, and there are grown people crying at a Godzilla movie, and it felt in a way like when in 85 when Godzilla tips into the volcano, I was like sad, but this is not that. There's no sadness for Godzilla in this movie. He's back to being just a horrible, terrible force of nature. Ostensibly sent to Japan accidentally by the US, as if that's not bad enough, right? Like I mean, he was a monster beforehand, as we go through it, but becoming the Godzilla that we see that's terrifying is because of nuclear testing. So and I mean, there's a lot to say. There were people dancing to the Godzilla army march part. Dun, 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 dun. There's like multiple people at my screening dancing in their seats, which that's amazing. Plus just the score in general, not just the callbacks, not just the needle drops were good. So I wish this was lasting longer, because I really do want to see it again in the theater. I chose to go to a kind of smaller IMAX to see it, and that was awesome. But I would love to see it. This will be, the 4K can't come out soon enough for me.
Wow, excellent. Julia, you've seen a lot of Godzilla movies, but I don't know if you carry it around as part of your identity. What did you What were your thoughts?
I thought it was fantastic. I definitely don't think it looks cheap or whatever. I mean, I know you're not saying it's cheap, but it
Oh, no,
looks
no.
like a blockbuster. It looks, it
Oh,
has because the effects are great. The the monster is really good looking, and never for a minute went. It doesn't look like he's actually there, or it doesn't look like he's like that ship is really
mhm.
that size or whatever. I thought it was really it looked fantastic. I love the story. I love the characters. I think that what's really cool to me about this film is that it doesn't feel like it's just kind of like Godzilla porn, where it's just kind of like, okay, let's get through the next scene so we can get back to Godzilla, or where's Godzilla at. I know that people are always going to complain that there's not enough screen time in Godzilla movies, but that's just always the way it is. And in this case, it feels like without the Godzilla pieces, the movie stands alone. It's the stories and
Yeah.
the characters and the plot. So I thought that was really really cool. But you ask about whether I carry it as an identity. I'm really bad about forgetting movies as soon as I watch them, pretty much. So what I'm trying to remember, and I'd be curious if, I don't know, Tony or maybe Drew, but probably Tony, if you want to remind me and possibly the listener, what parts of this Godzilla are like canon to other Godzillas in history? Like, does Godzilla always heal that way? Does he always
no,
have
no.
the spine, pop the spine, the vertebrae that pop out, or whatever you call those, the plates that pop out when does he always have the atomic breath? Like, what was the
So,
history of Godzilla compared with this one?
so I mean, it is a reboot. If you don't mind,
Yeah.
it is a reboot. It's kind of, in some ways, I would say it takes the place of 54 Godzilla, because the main difference is that takes place several years after the war. Obviously, it's contemporary to its time period. But I mean, you could read it as perhaps you could go from this Godzilla perhaps to the 85 Godzilla, because that was a reboot. So the Showa era, so the 54 to 75 era is kind of, and it got way goofier, right? And I love that. But then there was the Heisei era, which started in 84 and went into the 90s, and then Millennium era, and we're currently in the Reiwa era.
And that's also not counting the MonsterVerse movies, which are
sure. Yeah, I'm
legendary pictures.
I'm speaking purely of Toho, Japan's timeline, which Julia was asking about. So,
and then there's
we reboot. We reboot cyclically, right? Go ahead, Drew.
Well, I was going to say, there's also various animated Godzillas. There's the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla animated series, and then there's there's a lot of, I mean, not even counting comic books. Like, there's like so many Godzilla timelines, and I honestly think that's one of the reasons why the character is so popular. Is there's kind of a Godzilla for whatever mood you're in.
Right. To answer your other question, Julia, the glowing spines are like the kind of, if you want to go with canon, he has atomic breath and the spines glow. and he, depending on how far into the era, so 54 and 85, he's like back to being a force of nature. And you kind of heard of it, and it's Shin Godzilla as well. More force of nature, but it's a different, the context in each one of those is these kind of rebirths of each of the context, because we have a Cold War era Japan in 84, and a bubble, can't remember when the bubble burst in the 80s, but you have an economic power Japan at the time. To contrast the 54 trying to come into an economic power, right? Rebuilding everything, in this one, everything's, I mean, this is directly, everything is laid to waste.
Well,
it's about as bad as it can be for people in Japan and during the movie.
But for the monster himself, like you said, the thing about the spines, does he usually have that regenerative, that Wolverine regenerative?
Oh, no, that's definitely, because they mess him up pretty bad at times. Like, even Hedorah messes him up pretty badly in Smog Monster. Like, that's one of the more terrifying ones. He really gets kind of acidy eaten. I mean, he's resilient, but it's not this immediate. I'm going to repair.
The regeneration thing, though, like that to me first really starts being talked about in Biollante. Like that's the first, like the so it's not like an entirely new idea, but it's like the first time it's really been visualized. Like it's like to the extent that it has in this.
I think it's worth pointing out. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Tony.
I had this idea that it's entirely possible that because he regenerates, this Godzilla is angry because he's just constantly in irradiated pain. And Rain's like, that's really dark. And I'm like, well, it sort of almost makes sense. Like it's
relatable.
He's unable to die, and he's like, he's constantly like it feel something about the way it's done gave me this impression that like it's possible, you know. And I'm not a big like fan theory kind of clickbait article fan theory stuff, but like as I was watching, I kept thinking like, I wonder if that's part of it. Like, you know,
I think that's a thesis
like
that could easily be respected, Tony, because the reason I say that is like, and by the way, I want to return to this whole thing about it's fascinating to me that there's so many Godzillas that we refer to them as eras, which I find fascinating. But this one, this movie, I think it's very strange that it starts out where it starts out. Like the original, the 1954 one had a certain thesis they wanted to get to, which was force of nature. Godzilla is the atomic bomb. How are we going to gather up our strength against the atomic bomb? This is not that at all. This movie it's fascinating to me how this movie picks its themes and hits them over and over and over again. Our man who is suffering already from survivor's guilt, and we'll talk about him in a second, but he comes back to Tokyo, and he comes back to Tokyo specifically after the Doolittle raid, which was an American atrocity that killed 100,000 people, that people don't talk about very much because they're overwhelmed with how horrifying the atomic destruction of Nagasaki and Hiroshima were, but the firebombing of Tokyo is a disgrace to the American soul. And it starts with that. But the movie is not interested in a rah-rah jingoistic, the problem is the Americans thing. This movie is deeper even than that, which is we need to find somehow in our own souls the ability to go forward knowing that we live in a world that's capable of things like the Tokyo firebombing and whatever the hell else we get up to. And it's, you know, that you can do cowardly things and terrible things and you can wind up being the hero. It's so weird. It has a lot of like lessons that I've never seen before in an action movie. Like this movie makes a powerful argument that cowardice itself can turn out to be, oddly enough, a cosmic favor because you'll be around to do something good later.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot into I failed my job as a kamikaze pilot and what actually being a kamikaze pilot is. And I want to get into it.
The main character.
I also want to get into it later. The thing that happens at the end, I thought about, and I was talking to Rain about it. But yeah, I mean, our protagonist comes in and he's like, oh, hey, my, he parks his plane, and the mechanics go, I don't think there's anything wrong with your plane. And everybody kind of just looks around like, oh, okay, well, good job not protecting us. Yeah. But it's not just that. It's his own, yes, it's cowardice, but it's also just, I'm not ready for war. I mean, they're so
well, and he's questioning the logic of what it means to be a kamikaze pilot, and like you're basically you're going on a suicide run. And
well, even there's even, it's interesting too because there's like Matsumoto, who did we know as Star Blazers. Yamato was a big war. Harlock is a German war hero, which is kind of its own kind of weird, almost problematic thing because he's a hero. His ancestors he meets his ancestors cross as Japanese and German, right? But he's even got manga about stories about kamikaze pilots and the war, and it's all this stuff. And like we don't see, I think I get the impression we're far enough removed that we can have this kind of story. We're like, what
Yes.
is it? What does it mean to have, you know, to think about these things, you know,
Well,
and
and
his own regret.
to be a soldier who can question the wisdom of your orders, because they're talking, it probably wouldn't make any difference. One kamikaze ultimately, even though the woman who loses her children believes, or at least pretends to believe, that a kamikaze would make a difference. When I was
Well,
growing up in the movies, you would never allow somebody to give an argument that orders sometimes should be stupid and not be followed. But I will tell you that was happening on, like, All in the Family. There was a whole conversation on All in the Family at Thanksgiving where this guy says, this young person over here was a draft dodger and Archie thinks he's a disgrace. But my son died in the Vietnam War, and actually today I can tell you I wish that I could talk to my son. And that
right.
those are deep things, and it's so funny to hear. We live in such a jingoistic country that we still don't hear these arguments very much, and it's really
Right.
neat.
Well, and this is what I'm saying about the film standing alone without the Godzilla, because that's all
Yeah.
the movie without the Godzilla piece.
Yeah,
And
Right.
that
yes, that's true.
character, it's notable that the character that at first is so mad at him because he didn't sacrifice his life and possibly save the town and save her children, becomes his best friend. Like, she becomes
Yeah,
the
she's
person that will.
Sumiko, the
Yeah,
older
she
lady.
becomes the person that will be supportive of him and his, kind of makeshift family, as it were, throughout the film. And so that's what I love, is that these characters evolve and their relationships grow,
Well,
separate from the whole Godzilla thing.
and what this movie is doing, that I feel like a lot of, not just movies but fiction in general, don't always do a great job of, is putting up the notion that people are complicated, and that, as you just said, relationships evolve, and it's not always as black and white as good guys and bad guys, and within the larger context of World War II, you have a character that is in, service of Imperial Japan, which puts him on the opposite side of our country, but it puts him in a empathetic, sympathetic position.
Yeah.
And it allows you to see that also sometimes, the quote unquote goons of the establishment are more complicated than, the bad actions of a country. And I think this is an important lesson right now, for a lot of people to think about. The bad actions of a country isn't necessarily speak ill of all of its citizens, because, again, people are complicated, and sometimes, a government can be crappy, but the people who live in the country can be heroic and beautiful and kind. And the way that they use Godzilla in this, at least one of the ways that they use Godzilla to mirror what the internal struggle of our main character, is that, Godzilla is a character that has represented a lot of things over the years, but in this movie, one of the things that Godzilla represents is a sort of post-traumatic stress disorder, which I found fascinating, the way that was
Absolutely
handled.
Tony, you were going to say something.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. And when we meet Koichi and Sumiko, like, the reason she's so angry too is because it does make sense to her that if everybody had just done their job, my children would not be dead.
Yeah.
He's there. He's the absolute center, like laser focus. Like, you were a coward, and if there were less of you, my children would be alive. And that's a really human, like, you can't blame somebody for thinking that. Also, this is a country, Imperial Japan, who was telling, their citizens, like, if America gets here, grandmas, children, everybody, here's some spears, here's some sticks, you're gonna have to defend yourself. They're gonna do the worst things to you possible, right?
Yeah.
And so there was a whole propaganda about, like, but then again, like, I've just rewatched Band of Brothers, for example.
Yeah.
And that's, our version of all that. I felt, it was weird to me. My grandfather was in the war. He was in the Seabees, And he was, I think, part of they built a lot of stuff, and then also I think there was a POW camp that he was around for a while.
It's also the American equivalent of the engineers in this movie.
Yeah. And so he was, but I felt weird as I was growing up. I actually talked to him. I recorded a bunch of his stories a while back. But what is it like having seen that side of things, and then your grandson is like all about Japanese culture and Japanese pop culture? Is that weird? Like I felt kind of weird. Like it was something I was cognizant of, and of course he had spent enough time away, and it didn't seem to really bother him. But I once I was old enough to understand that might be strange. I always questions a little bit in my mind, but there's a lot of nuance to the whole PTSD thing, and also what is Imperial Japan and the war effort versus what are the people just trying to survive. By the way, the ships that are mentioned in it are real ships. Like all of that stuff is there's a lot of history in between.
I love the sprinkling of history.
Lines.
The sort of historical Easter eggs here. I mean, such as they're besides just the ships, the maneuvering of the ships, and the fact that Japan is being ruled by Governor MacArthur during this period, and MacArthur, who enjoys a certain popular cult status, because he put through policies that were not unpopular. So it was a very strange time, and they're being ruled by this occupying power. But what's always the case, what's the case in this movie, and also it was in the case in Shin, is even though Shin had kind of a happier feeling about it, is a general not distrust of the government, other than in as much as those guys are just going to disappoint you all the time.
Well,
the government is going to fuck up.
The difference, the main difference for me is Shin straddles this line of, I mean, Japanese bureaucracy is legendary. Like,
yes,
I've had friends just going to the DMV is just a nightmare fuel, right? Taxes, all of it. Like, and I found it interesting that Shin is one of the most nationalistic, like Japanese nationalistic movies I've seen, yet still goes, yeah, but the bureaucracy still sucks.
Right.
Like, it's the worst. Like just cut you are a bunch of old dudes. You've seen it also in Akira, like where the old guys are all just arguing over BS when there's a world-destroying child possibly coming at them. And this similar things. The bureaucracy is the worst. Whereas this is like, hey, the government is not gonna really do it for us right now. Like, it's up to us to stick together. Like, they tried stuff, things are going on, but it's really the people are the focus. And so it's almost, I wouldn't say the anti-Shin Godzilla, but it deals with Japan in such a different way, contextually, and that is fascinating because there is like, hey, I guess we can't. The U.S. has its own stuff going on with Russia, and also they're not here every day. Like we're the ones who have to find rice, and we're the ones who have to find jobs, and and the best job I can get is risking my life to shoot mines that both of our governments put out there. Like, it's not just us. Like it's the U.S. put some and we put some, and the U.S. ones are worse because they're magnetic. So let's use a wooden. We're going to use a wooden ship. But all of that is just war has made this crappy, and I could die without having a Godzilla. But this is the job I got. So all of that stuff is the fact that the government's giving out these like, hey, you get a stipend and you get a job. By the way, it's clearing mines, so good luck, I guess. And that's a government job, by the way.
Well, and so, just like
that's fascinating.
In a sense, they're refugees in their own country because all the infrastructure has been destroyed in the same way.
Well, it looks like Godzilla has already destroyed everything because of we're dealing with as you said, a city that's just been firebombed. So. Yeah.
Drew, you were going to say something, in fact. Go
well, kind of telling off of the thing that Tony was saying. about the way this views, not the government, but also the Japanese people in general. One of the things that I really loved about this movie, and I think makes it very unique in this franchise in particular, which usually has, heroes that are astronauts or scientists or military, is this. And there were a lot of ex-military in this, mind you, but this had a very blue collar, regular working guys kind of, like the relationships of all the guys out on the boat and all that. It had this, because they couldn't count on the government and because they couldn't count on America, it really was this like, okay, working class people are going to come together and, we're going to come up with a solution and we're going to, fix that. And that sort of, kind of almost, it feels weird saying this about, Japanese characters, but almost like pro redneck view of the thing. Like,
definitely.
They're the Cajun Navy.
Class.
I mean, they're clearly, they're
and that was cool, because that's not usually the types of people that are celebrated in a science fiction movie. It's definitely not the sort of people that are even usually celebrated in a Godzilla film. And it's funny because, like, and I'm sure we're going to get more into this, but I've read some of the, because we live in 2023, immediately there's all these like opinions about the politics of this movie. While watching it, because of, at least in part, what I'm talking about, like this felt like very staunchly sort of like an anti-fascist, pro-working class kind of.
Well, it's definitely anti-war. Film. Yeah, it's anti-war, and I would say, not trusting, like, it goes a lot into like, hey, we were fed this line by Imperial Japan, and that just didn't work. Even our scientist is, we see our scientist first on a boat having the same job. Like he's not, he's not just a pure, like at one point maybe he had a lab and everything like that, but he's even, and then the reaction that eventually happens where even the people who are left with like, are you sure your idea is going to work? Like we just went through a war. How can I trust you? So,
and during that conversation, they have the whole line about, why didn't we have ejection seats, or why didn't we have like a way, like what it made no, they kind of question
why was there all this incompetence? How can we make sense of the incompetence?
It's not even just incompetence. It's that the Imperial Japan was selling them a line of goods. You're going to be a hero, to the nation if you, that sort of brainwashing that sometimes goes involved with an ideology. And there's that staunch rejection of that, and but also like, look at what we can accomplish when we come together, because like they absolutely have to figure out, out of all of our heroes in all of our Godzilla movies, these people have to figure out how to do this with the bare minimum. Like there's no oxygen destroyer. King Kong isn't going to come to fight Godzilla for them. We're
going to use bubbles.
We're going to give Godzilla a case of the bends. Is what we're going to do.
Exactly.
Fascinating.
And hope it works. And like, there's not even a guarantee.
No,
oxygen destroyer was a concern.
It doesn't work, actually.
Yeah, the oxygen destroyer was a concern because, hey, is this yet another weapon that we unleash upon the world? And what is that? Like, do we become our own worst enemies? Yeah. This is just like, we need to do whatever we can, because I don't think any of this, like, there's a chance none of this will work. And then what do we do?
But what I find so fascinating is that normally those kinds of questions about what does it all mean, like I said, I talked about how America had those in pop culture during the post-Vietnam era, right? And it's strange to look at this movie doing that historically, because is that in fact a relevant conversation today? I don't know, but it's a look at a compelling conversation happening then, and you definitely get wrapped up in it while you're
I
while
think
you're
that
watching it.
some of the absolutely a lot of the sort of political stuff is unfortunately, like not necessarily buying completely into what the people in power are telling you is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Is unfortunately still a really relevant conversation.
Yeah, that's
to
true.
have.
That's an excellent point. Julia, you were going to talk about the family dynamics of
Yeah, I wanted to kind of bring it back to the characters in that so our hero Shikishima is finds himself holding a small baby at one point, and he's like, I don't know what to do with this child. Somebody just shoved it at me as she was running away from angry people that she had stolen from. And so then she finds him again, and she's like, I've taken charge of this baby. It's not my baby. A dying woman asked me to take care of her. And so I'm taking care of her. So now she's like, and you're gonna help us, and we're moving in with you. Basically it just becomes automatic family of three people who previously had nothing to do with each other. And it's the sweetest, again, with the evolution of the relationships. It's the sweetest, kind of situation where he's just decided, well, I've got to take care of Noriko and Akiko. But because the reason I want to talk about it was because what made me think of it is that we were talking before about the PTSD, and he's not able, Shikishima, to have a real, like, he has a great relationship with her, but he's not able to have a romantic relationship or he's not able to ask her to marry him or whatever, even though he loves her.
commit to it. Yeah.
Because he's so fucked up about everything. Like he just feels like he should have died, or there's a reason why he doesn't, but he's not sure what it is, or what is he supposed to do. He's just got all this examination that he's doing about himself, and his own fight, his own war that he's personally in, that he can't. And so the other guy, the buddy, is like, why aren't you married? Like, why haven't you got married her? Why wouldn't you let the little child call you daddy? Like, what's wrong with you? Snap out of it, basically.
Right.
And then you've got the other. So you've got all these wonderful friendships between these men, where you have the guys that he's hanging out with that he works with on the boat that's picking up the mines out of the ocean or whatever. And you have his enemy from the original island, where in the Odo Island, the guy that said, your plane didn't have anything wrong with it, you're just a coward. And then Godzilla comes and kills everybody, and he's like, you didn't because he didn't shoot Godzilla. And so he's
he
like,
couldn't
see,
bring
so
himself
he
to.
keeps failing. He keeps failing in the eyes of other people to do the thing that needs to be done. And he feels all the shame about it, but he also has a really strong moral code. So I just find the whole thing fascinating. I think all those relationships, and the fact that they all come back around, like, so that guy ends up being his ally, even though he kind of hates him.
Yeah.
And the only reason he gets him back is because of the hatred.
There's a strong element of the idea of found family in this movie.
I want to talk a little bit about that when you're through, Drew.
Well, I think even though this is a period piece, I don't think that that's something that necessarily, if this movie was actually a movie from the 40s, I don't necessarily think that's something that would, that to me feels like a very contemporary.
Yeah.
Even though it's something that probably always existed, it feels like a very contemporary idea to be talking about.
We will,
I love it. Yeah.
And it is in Japan, especially when family is, and that's why so many people do go, like, why would you pick up a baby that's not yours?
Right.
Because I've even talked to I knew some people in, for example, Kyoto, where you're measured by, were you a family here when it was still the capital, like when it was still major. And then there's delineations of, like, it's not our kind of old money, new money. It's like, were you here, X hundreds of years ago? Right? Like, there's that, like, we've been here since this date.
Yeah.
Like, look at you with your century of family, or your 3 generations of family. Well, so that dynamic is, we in America especially, it is contemporary in the fact, like, yes, family is a thing, but we've had this kind of, hey, let's all, the melting pot kind of ideal has made that more of a thing for us. But in Japan, I mean, you'll see it more in, like, there's there's also that camaraderie, like, oh, we're in a gang together, or we're in a situation. There's some really good kind of found family kind of manga that I've read.
Yeah.
There is that you pick up, but especially in this era, that's why everybody is like talking about, like, why. And also, that baby eats up resources.
Yeah.
So why would you pick up a baby that's not yours, that's eating up your resources in this world of all places kind of idea? And what this movie, and the fact that this is a Godzilla movie, just makes it even better, is that this child can't prevent that. And what are we going to do? Like, what kind of people are we if we abandon this child? What kind of people are we if we don't stick together?
Right. And replace what's been assigned to us with what we can create for ourselves that might have beauty.
Exactly. And again, I think having close to 70 years worth of retrospect, being able to turn the lens back, you couldn't, even if you wanted to say more things about the war in 54, you just couldn't. And some of it by government demand, right?
Yeah.
Like, the part we talked about in the 54 with the courtroom scene, that was controversial in itself, like what you could show and how that all worked out, like, to get approval. So this idea of we're going to tell this story now is also fascinating again. And I'm coming from an American, I've read a decent amount, I try to get all the information, but I'm still despite what I know, we're still removed from that, and because so much of it is contextual to culture.
Yeah.
And so, I try to be very cognizant of that, but it's interesting to see, like, this is the kind of stuff we deal with. This is the movie we can get now in 2023, yes, which is fascinating.
It's amazing to me. One of the things that I found delightful, I loved how many contrasts there are in this film, where, for instance, the moments when Godzilla, a giant mutated dinosaur, are chasing their boat, right? And
that's horrifying too.
It's
like,
it's both horrifying, and please forgive me for saying this, it's horrifying and also so bizarre that it borders on hilarious. Like,
no,
it's funny the various reactions to that not only just amongst the four of us but online, because to me the image of that gigantic Godzilla head telling that frail little boat is one of the scariest images I have ever seen in a movie.
And it's very Jaws-like with the
absolutely.
The term I was trying to figure out earlier was dorsal plates. The dorsal plates are sticking up above the water, and it's just so much like
no,
Jaws.
But when it's like giant head, see, the thing is, I have a greater sense of absurdity than a lot of online, but there are people who would go, well, that looks silly to me, or it's so bizarre that it triggers my tendency to laugh, and so I can't be alarmed. Let me tell you, man, I'm laughing and I'm alarmed. I mean, it is.
Yeah. I think that's the dichotomy of it, right?
It gives you such an idea of how vulnerable these ants in this wooden boat are. With completely. And the other thing about this Godzilla, from the moment we're introduced to him, like in his original state as the sea monster of Odo Island, like, this is a much more emotive Godzilla than we've had in years. Right. And one of the things that, because of the way they do the face in this movie, because Monster vs. Godzilla and Shin Godzilla, for better or for worse, the decision was made that Godzilla is so godlike in a lot of ways that we don't need to see a lot of, emotion with him. We don't really know what's going through his mind. A lot of the anthropomorphism, I mispronounced that, but a lot of the sort of human-like traits that they've given Godzilla over the years, have been removed from a lot of the more contemporary Godzilla. This, they give him a really emotive face, and because of that, you get this palatable sense of sadism when he is attacking. Like when he, when they introduce him and he's biting the mechanics in half, or later on, after the first time we see him use his atomic breath, and there's the big mushroom cloud, and it almost just looks like he's sitting back admiring his handiwork. Like, Godzilla is so angry in this.
It's funny too, because you talk about like some of the suits. There's like a couple that are kind of more cat-like, and I talked to Rain. Our youngest cat, actually, she's really expressive, and I've been surprised. But she has this look when she really wants something, usually our food, and I'm like, she's got Godzilla face. Because there's a couple, like, there's this like brow thing that she had, like, and I said, like, oh, it's like Godzilla face. But I like that they brought that back. Also, scariest atomic breath. It reminds me. I don't know how many people have seen it, but there's the God warriors, God soldiers in Nausicaa, where they shoot a laser, and that's enough. And then after the laser hits, there's a huge just mushroom cloud. They're like, if that wasn't bad enough. They did a CG. I should link it. Somebody, I forgot who it was. Oh, now it's gonna haunt me. I'll have to look it up. Where they basically did a VFX demo reel of one of the God soldiers coming to Tokyo, and it really reminds me of that. I'll have to post that, because it's really,
also the fact that it burns him too. Like, that's a extremely unique idea, that this thing that we think of as Godzilla's most potent weapon, it actually hurts him to use it. And I don't know that I would want that for every version of Godzilla, but for this one, which is much more centered on, like, I feel like a lot of the times with the latter Heisei ones, and then definitely the MonsterVerse Godzilla, is that they're trying to invoke awe instead of fear. Whereas this one, I think they're like, no, you should be horrified, and I think the idea that his breath burns him and not just the buildings and the people around him is, that's an incredibly potent idea. If you're doing what now?
I was just thinking that destruction is very similar to what happens in Shin Godzilla, where Godzilla
but it's
is
so much less goofy.
Yeah, I agree. Well, again, Shin Godzilla is really playing around with the notion that something can be super weird looking and also disgusting and also scary. But yes, everything you said is absolutely right. I want to go back to the cat look of Godzilla for a second. So, Tony, this will give us an opportunity to talk about the eras of Godzilla. We don't have to go deep into it, because that would be like an hour-long thing. But there is a whole era of Godzilla where he's got a I don't know how to describe it. He's got a cat lip. His top lip looks like a cat's. It makes him look like a cat. Whereas in the era of like Godzilla versus Gigan, as I pointed out online the other day, he looks to me like a border terrier. There's a sort of big superhero puppy dog.
Well, in the Millennium, Godzilla has like a very wolfish head.
Right.
Like, there's always been kind of a weird. Yes, Godzilla is a dinosaur, but there's also this sort of chimera thing going on, where he has some mammalian qualities.
Yes. And I think that's fascinating. I mean, I don't know what my question is there, Tony. I was throwing it to you, and I didn't actually set you up with a good question.
Part of it is also, to give him more. Like, there's ones where he has bigger eyes, because that's more emotion. There's one where he talks, and depending on which dub or sub version you get, like, someone's just,
it's like there's two Godzillas.
Like, there's so many different ones.
And Scary Godzilla and whatever the hell is the other thing.
Adorable.
This
but
kind of
this
built
one
in
actually,
together.
This one, yeah, exactly. That's what I was gonna say. This one actually is terrifying and also adorable at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, the design is just the build up to the his unleashing his atomic breath, where it's like a countdown. That's genius. I mean, that was just so,
for those
like,
who haven't seen it,
oh
and
my
for some
goodness,
reason are still listening to this podcast.
Yeah,
anyway,
please. I hope that
the dorsal plates, the dorsal plates will pop out one at a time, starting at the base of his tail or his spine or whatever, and they turn this bright ice, glowing blue, and it just goes shoo shoo and there's like one at a time pops up, and then he's kind of like charging. Then the breath is also that same icy blue, and it's like a laser beam that he'll shoot at, and then that's what ends up killing him in the end. Since the bubbles,
Yes.
the bubble sending him, down to the bottom of the ocean, and then pulling, and then the other whatever they do to pull him back up to give him the bends doesn't actually kill him, even though we have the like, as you call it, the Cajun Cajun navy of towboats that are trying to pull.
That
All
was
of
so
that
good.
fails, and so we end up with the kamikaze pilot is going to fly a plane full of bombs, and unbeknownst to us, although I totally predicted it, he actually has an ejection seat now, so he's able to our main character is able to eject but he flies the bombs into Godzilla's mouth right as he's about to do the laser what did you call it, what do you
Atomic
call
Atomic
it,
breath.
breath.
the atomic
Yeah.
breath. So that ends up killing him because it causes it so that he's not able to blast it out,
Expel
and
it.
to
Yeah.
it kind of ends up exploding him. So all these holes pop out, like he's just like all this atomic blue light is coming out of him. It's really amazing. It's quite an amazing effect, honestly, and it like blows into smithereens. But of course, we find that his heart is still beating even though he is blown.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
And since we know that
he's
he's
not dead.
regenerative, he's gonna come back.
by the way,
That-
the thing I was talking about earlier, and I think we should post it when we post, is called God Warrior Appears in Tokyo. Or Giant God Warrior Appears in Tokyo, and it's directed by Shinji Higuchi, who does a lot of really great effects stuff, and worked on Return of Godzilla, and Shin Godzilla actually. So he worked, Shin Godzilla was directed. So there's a tie into that. And Hideaki Anno, who did Evangelion and also worked Shin Godzilla, so there's a tie to that beam thing that happens in Nausicaa. There's a VFX. It's basically kind of a VFX reel where just this giant thing. We should post a link, but it's interesting that's what they chose based off of people who previously worked on Shin Godzilla.
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
I want to circle back to something you said, Jason. You're talking about how there are two Godzillas, and I was thinking about this early. Outside of the fact that there's all these different, because there's really like close to a dozen Godzillas when you take into all the different timelines. But there's two types of Godzilla films. There's the Godzilla versus Mankind, which is what this movie is, and what Godzilla 84 is, and the original movie is. And then you have like the monster wrestling Godzilla, which is most of the movies are the monster wrestling Godzilla. What I was thinking about earlier, and I do think this is why Godzilla is such a sturdy pop culture icon, is that he is a bit like Batman in that you have the original, which is this more dark, broody kind of sinister character that and then it gets softened up over time, and then at times it's like weird, and at times it's silly, but it's all uniquely Godzilla. And I think that is the secret sauce to why Godzilla remains popular, is because you have this one character that can be all these different moods. And Batman is very much the same thing. Like the Tim Burton Batman is Batman, but also the Adam West is Batman. But but then you also have Neil Adams, globetrotting Indiana Jones Batman. And
isn't that great? Yeah, no, you're right.
What galls me is that people, the amount of people who were just like, just dig their heels in and go, this isn't a Godzilla, or that's not a Godzilla. Like my brother. You can choose, like, you don't have to watch, like, you can watch whatever. If you love monster wrestling, there's a huge chunk of monster wrestling. If you don't want to watch monster wrestling, you can watch 54, you can watch 84, you can watch the new Monsterverse. Like, it's the same with comic book stuff. Like, my friend, you don't have to read anything you don't want to. Like, there's no competition, or you can read everything.
Well, and frankly, there is just an embarrassment of Godzilla
there's-
stuff right now.
Oh, there's two.
Like,
I mean, there's two
it's
shorts.
so-
There's a Jaguar short as well, which is like, you know,
well,
there's a,
and the
there's a
fact
Megalon
that, you
short,
know,
like-
the fact that within a few weeks of this coming out, Kurt fucking
Exactly.
Russell is in the Godzilla franchise now.
Exactly.
Never in a million years when I was a kid and, you know, I had to read about Godzilla, you know, and Fangoria, and I would just hope that it would get an American release. That I
Right,
think that,
exactly.
you know, I hate to sound like the crotchety old man, but you know, when I see some of the comments online, and I'm not saying you have to like every movie.
Oh,
Like,
right.
you don't have to, but, you know, also don't shit on other people's joy. Like,
Oh yeah.
you know,
I just don't understand. Like, you don't have to. Like, there's so much Godzilla right now. Like, this is
my
crazy.
main complaint about a lot of that stuff is that it's just lazy. Like, it's so lazy to go, oh, I prefer Neil Adams Batman, and so I don't like Adam West. It's just so, like, it's
Well, I mean,
it's
it's fine
so
if you don't like
easy.
something, but like, why? Like, okay, cool.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
I
heck,
am-
I've
I
had people say, I don't
embrace-
like the podcast you do. Like, man, the X button is right over there.
I embrace Godzilla, you know,
okay.
I embrace all the different Godzillas depending on, like, this was the right Godzilla for the mood I was in, because I was wanting to watch like the dark, scary Godzilla, but
Mhm.
I absolutely do also like the Godzilla that gets in the fist fights with King Kong and, you know, dances and does tail slides and, you know, like, you know, all that other stuff. I like
wanna
Godzilla when
go
he's a
watch it again.
I like Godzilla when he's a superhero too, you know,
Yeah.
like,
I mean,
you know,
I was not a huge fan of the previous Godzilla Kong movie. I mean, but also, if you love Godzilla Kong, the previous one, awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it had. I mean, it's got
got
you know,
stuff that's
Monarch
very
builds.
likable.
It's got adventure and Hollow Earth, and Monarch builds off of it. Like, all this stuff. Like, if that's your jam, who am I? Like, sure.
Well, and
I don't ever have to watch it again if I don't want to.
Yeah.
It's just
Well,
that's
and
it. I mean, we
you
have
know, like,
streaming services, we have Blu-ray, like whatever, man.
I
It's
am
crazy.
excited about the new hot pink Barbenheimer Godzilla, you know, and I accept that as a version of Godzilla, just like I accept this as a version of God. And as I previously noted, I did not like the look. Like, I understand that, you know, something can be bent too far for you. Like I have a very hard time accepting Shin Godzilla, even though I think the movie is good, as a version of Godzilla, because so I do understand no, you bent the icon too far. I do understand that, but at the same time, I don't go out like if I see somebody posting about Shin Godzilla, I don't immediately go on that person's post and go, I fucking hate that design and the dorsal fin plate lasers were stupid. Like, I don't do that, because let people have the things that they enjoy, you know?
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
online-
heck, I've got a Shin Godzilla box, like a action figure box, you know, action figure box right on my shelf. I like right to my left, like, but I get. I mean, it is a weird. I mean, especially the you know, initial Shin Godzilla is a crazy beast. Like, I gotta give it up just for like being able to get Toho to sign off on. This
The
is
weird
like
lizard
when we
with the
first see
buggy eyes.
Godzilla, this is what he's gonna look like.
tadpole
It's just
Godzilla.
like, what the?
That
like,
is so
somebody
horrifying.
had to
He's
approve
so
that.
grody. Yeah.
You know how many check boxes have to be checked? You know, especially because we talked about Japanese bureaucracy. You know how many layers
Yeah.
that I have to go through,
you know,
and they had to convince them to go like, no, look, it looks like this first. Like, oh,
I
my
think
word.
for me, the reason why Shin did not work, or the design, again, I'm not talking about the movie itself. I think it's a good movie, but the Shin design. My love for Godzilla is directly tied to my love of dinosaurs. So, like, for example, when the pre-mutated Godzilla shows up in this movie, I immediately I want all the toys.
Oh, I thought of you as soon as that happened. I was like, oh man, I wish I was seeing this with Drew.
Drew,
So
what is
happy.
he? Are we to understand he's a dinosaur that has survived into the 1940s?
That's going back to the original idea of Godzilla.
Gojirasaurus.
He was an extant dinosaur.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
That's why he. I mean, that's part of the. I need to read the novelizations I have, but that's part of why Godzilla's Revenge.
Oh,
You know,
right.
despite there being oxygen destroyed Godzilla in '54, the idea that there is a Gojirosaurus that can get mutated is the key. You know, the bit
Right.
of all
Absolutely.
of that. So.
Yeah.
and so there is like that element of cryptozoology to Godzilla's origin as well, but also like the idea of him as a dinosaur, it does kind of go back to that chimera thing again, because he's got the overall body plan of a T-Rex, but he's got the spikes of a Stegosaurus,
Right.
but he's also semi-aquatic, which is more so it's there's this again,
Godzilla is everything to all people and dinosaurs.
But what fascinated me about Godzilla when I was a child was the idea of Godzilla as a mutated dinosaur. So like the closer you get to that, the happier I'm going to be. So like the pre-mutated Godzilla in this movie was probably my dream Godzilla design. Like I was so happy during those scenes. But
No, it's wonderful. It is really, yeah, and that was scary too. That and it also reminds you, if you remember, because in that point Godzilla is not very tall because he's pre-mutated. That in the creation of Godzilla in 1954, if I recall correctly, I haven't looked this up recently, but if I recall, they were trying to come up with something that was similar to King Kong.
Yeah.
And they wanted to create a character that would be like King Kong because that was popular. And so they came up with a dinosaur. King Kong was also, if you recall, a character wandering around on an island somewhere and had not been acknowledged by.
It's also part whale, part gorilla is the kind of
right
amalgam name, right? Like,
yeah, fantastic.
Well, the speaking of whales, something that I even posted about along.
Yeah.
So since we're talking about Godzilla creature design, there was I really hope, because there's like this culture now where I feel like people review movies based off of rumors that they have heard, and I feel like that there is a hard lesson to be viewed in this particular film, in that there was about a year or so back, there was a rumor that they were going to try and get Godzilla away from dinosaurs altogether, and Godzilla in this movie was going to be a mutated whale, and there was a supposed leaked design that looked very much like a killer whale,
right?
And what ended up on screen, like there was a lot of people like freaking out about this online, and like, oh, Godzilla Minus One is gonna suck. Godzilla Minus One is gonna suck. How dare they change Godzilla? So disrespectful. Like, and I somewhat get that, because like if that was the direction that they went in, I would have been disappointed, because as previously mentioned, I love a dinosaur like Godzilla. That is my favorite flavor of Godzilla. But, it just goes to show you, don't freak out until you're actually watching a movie. Like, don't review a movie you have not seen yet. Because not only was that whale Godzilla complete, that was completely inaccurate. We ended up with the most dinosaur-like Godzilla that we have seen in over a decade. Like, he's even more dinosaur looking than the MonsterVerse Godzilla. Like calm down, people. It's all okay.
That's
it's
really interesting. Well,
I think it's fascinating too that the director, of Godzilla, MonsterVerse Godzilla comes and watches this and goes, "Damn it." Like, I'm jealous of this is Godzilla, man. I did what I could, but I'm paraphrasing, but he said he was jealous.
But yeah, everybody, it has earned tremendous admiration. I mean, tremendous. So I'm so happy about that.
I'm sure, and like the internet does, I'm sure there's already a backlash against it. Can't live up to the hype, but whatever, man. I'm over here enjoying stuff. So
it's so hilarious because from my perspective, nothing. I mean this in the most respectful way, but nothing means anything really it doesn't matter if you like Godzilla, great, so if you don't like a Godzilla movie, you're probably going to live long enough that they're going to reboot this 2-3 times in your lifetime.
Well,
maybe
there's now multiple, because there's the Japanese series and then there's the
Yeah.
American series. You get to choose, because like the American series, what they've got going on now, Matt, I am paraphrasing Matt Frank, by the way,
Right.
who is the Godzilla guru. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
this is my original thought, but you have the MonsterVerse series, which is way more at this point the Showa, monster wrestling.
It's
more,
went that way, right? Like it started.
Yeah,
it went the same way. Showa, like
yeah, a much more quick trajectory too.
Not so much, but anyway.
But like the and then you have the Japanese Godzilla, which is more serious and somber, and you can choose if you want, or you can enjoy both if you want, which is what I choose to do.
I am gonna have my steak and wine and Fruit Loops all in the same meal, or Hostess cakes, or whatever you think of as like sugary fun.
What strikes me is
you can do caviar and what, I don't know how you want to.
You can do all of that or none of it. That's what I've been thinking about lately. Because, and I mentioned this because there's all these, anytime a director of any import shows up in the papers, the first thing people want to do is get him or her to comment on what he or she thinks about the most popular non-deep films out there. And I'm like, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Except that I will say this: the counter argument to that is this movie in particular does show that a genre that not so much me or Tony, because like we're very invested in this, but a series of films that a lot of people don't think of as being deep actually can be.
Oh, absolutely.
Really
like,
deep.
And I noticed there was somebody who was like,
I
hate Godzilla movies, that was talking to you, Jason, like on social media. And you could, I bet you could do an edit that cuts out Godzilla.
Yes.
And send that movie to them as a war-torn Japan people trying to. I mean, there's only so much you could get away with, because the whole third act is Godzilla action, right?
I mean, that particular person is in her 70s, and I'm sure that she's. Thinking, I'm not even gonna like.
No, that's fine. But what I'm saying is this is you'll have people going, wow. Not only now, granted, these are people who are going to go see a Godzilla movie, right? Regardless,
right?
But the reactions of, I came to see a Godzilla movie, I was not expecting a possible Best Picture.
Yeah,
and it's decently universal in that. But yeah. I have been reading, there is a discussion, I think it's worth mentioning, about the budget. And again, I try not to get into budgetary, Rotten Tomatoes, all this stuff about money and ratings, and that tends to not. I don't want to care about it, but I will. I have found some interesting things. Julia's right in that everything's up on the screen. Like, it's pretty amazing. Like 15 million is still pretty amazingly small. But but you have to put in perspective, because not everybody's getting paid the scale, or the animators and VFX people are kind of, I don't know if taken advantage of is the right word, but like, they're working long hours for not as much pay, which is terrible, considering that in the U.S. we work long hours and not much. VFX houses are traditionally overworked and underpaid. The same with like who you hire as stars. And also, this is really, if I remember, and I don't quote me on this, but the number I saw was like, upwards of 50 million or more, 60 million was like the top cost for a film from Japan. So if you scale that, this is in reality still a lot for a movie from Japan, right? So like, take whatever, if you made it relative to a blockbuster movie that's say 200 million, then you're still looking at a $60 million movie if you use that scale, right? So, but that said, still impressive. Like, this holds up, and this is something I've seen a lot. Like, I've talked about it when we talk about Fantastic Fest films, and I'll see a movie at Fantastic Fest. Now, granted, people have already kind of weeded out, like you're making choices as you program for a festival. But I see foreign movies where you go, whoa, where this is an artist, this is a group of artists, because no film is. Although I've seen a couple of small movies done by very, very, very few people that hold up in that same way. But that's the kind of stuff where you go, okay, this is a group with artistry, and not to say that blockbusters can't be art, right? Like, I'm not. In fact, that's the whole misnomer of these comparisons, right? Like, that stuff can be fun, and that can, like, there's still a lot in that.
Well, and a lot of times people look for an artificial difference. I mean, the headline will be so and so, like Jodie Foster disses superheroes, and the actual quote would be, "Well, I liked Iron Man." So I mean, it's just so unfair.
It's all I really hate the way that people are kind of baiting that, because a lot of times what they're really saying is like, hey, there's this, can we make more mid-budget things that have different stakes or that are more indie? And again, you can have your Marvel, you can have your blockbuster. I don't even like to use that. Like, you can have a blockbuster movie, right?
Yes.
Because it also extends to Fast and Furious, all this stuff. Like, I think that a blockbuster movie has a certain thing.
Yes.
But what a lot of people are saying is, can we also have mid-budget movies? Can we go back to that kind of more? Can there be more space? Can there be more places for movies?
Well, and
there's a lot of that
discussion, but I really think, Tony, by the way, the answer to that is there is, if you want to just go watch one. In other words, people are not aware of it because the conversation, it's a self-fulfilling problem.
Well, no, but I think, but it is harder to make those movies now. Like, that's a reality.
I mean, that might be true, but the truth is, you work for a theater company. I go to theaters all the time. You go to the theater this weekend. There's plenty of mid-budget movies we could go watch.
Well, and again, why I say Fantastic Fest is because I look at movies and I'll go, wait, this is all of it. You see something, a good example. I mean, there's tons, but like, I still come back to Vesper, where that just art direction, everything about it is like, wow, you have made this thing like that wasn't done by the same companies that are working here in the US, that kind of stuff. And but there's multiple instances of that, and people are like, that's where you see people coming together and being scrappy. And I think that's where we really kind of want to reward, because nobody's expecting a Godzilla to look this good, but hey, it can be done. Right? Like, if you get the right people together with the right vision, with the right scrappiness, this is something that, but not everybody is going to be able to do that. Which is,
I want to wrap it there.
Sure. But I think that in some way, but the reason I want to talk about it is because a lot of people are kind of highlighting that, but contextually, it's more like, I think it shows less about like, oh, look at these bloated budgets, and more about when you get the right people together, you can create something like this. And I wish the conversation was closer to that. One thing I don't think is the whole thing that came out this week of like, what we need is more executives looking at movies. Like, at no point has there ever been like more executives make a movie better. Like, if that's your take, if you're like, that was possibly one of the most, like, I've never seen that work ever. In fact, it's gonna make it so much freaking worse and just give you the blandest, most.
I'm not going to name names, but that was a regrettable thing for that executive to
when
say.
When that happens, you get the most masticated, chewed up, blandest, beigest thing possible. And that's the take that people.
I mean, it's.
It doesn't work. Yeah, it's just you just end up with brown. If you just
that was silly.
Anyway, instead, like, but I wish that we could do more about celebrating the artistry of it in some ways, and less about the actual, like, this is money and this is I don't know, Rotten Tomato scores, or for video games, it's what's the game rankings and all that crap.
No, I agree. It's like talking about baseball, and you have to talk about statistics, and you also can talk about the love of the game. I want to get to a final thing that Drew wanted to talk about, and then we should get to our final thoughts. But Drew, you wanted to talk about the ending.
Well, more specifically, it's funny when you're looking at a movie and you're thinking about your reactions to things. And this movie ends on a fairly hopeful note. It's got a fairly Hollywood ending to a degree. And I was thinking about spoilers, although I guess if you're listening to this long into it and you're still listening, you probably don't care about that. The female lead in the movie, whose character name I am forgetting at the moment, which I feel terrible about, but she goes through probably one of the more harrowing sequences.
Noriko, like the
yeah, like where she survives by sheer dumb luck in a lot of ways. Godzilla's attack on a train that she's in, and then
the second she survives twice, so she also is kind of destined to survive things.
Well, that's kind of my point. I was thinking about, our conversation about Last Voyage of the Demeter, and when we were talking about the fact that, I actually really enjoyed that movie had the cojones to kill a child. I am normally the person, I don't react well to forced sentiment or characters. Like, I don't want a cat to be saved just because it's a cat. I don't want a dog to be saved just because it's a dog. I don't want a kid to be saved just because it's a kid. I don't want the love interest to live just because they're the love interest. Like I have a lot of cynical bones in my body, and I will be the first one normally to roll my eyes at a lot of things. However, this movie resurrects her after her seemingly being destroyed during the scene where Godzilla first uses his atomic breath, and I cheered for that. And I think, the difference being is it felt earned. Like it felt like it worked with the rest of the movie. Like there was like an emotion. Like I cared about it. It wasn't just that, oh, she's surviving because she is, the love interest. She survived because this was a character about, this is a movie about, ultimately about choosing to live, about hope. I just, I wish more screenwriters could look at that instead of because there's that, the whole screenwriting theory, you've quoted this a lot, the whole save the cat thing,
Yes.
And I hate that. It makes me grind my teeth. And, so when watching this movie, I had a long, hard think about what was different. And I was like, well, it's because it was emotionally rewarding. Like, it doesn't matter to me that it is not logical. Like, logically, she should not have survived, but because I was tacked into this movie emotionally, I was able to just hand wave it with like movie magic, and it bypassed my bitter, rotten, black, piece of meat that I call my heart. And, I was just like, yes, I love the fact that she survived. This is the perfect ending to this movie. It was earned.
Well, there's two parts. I mean, whenever I see these things, I mean, unless you see it, and I've seen movies where it's like you can't survive that. I mean, we live in times like John Wick is a cartoon character at this point. Like the amount of times people get shot.
I just want to point out that Charles Durning was stabbed many times and shot and still dancing in Best Little House in Texas. So
of course, but
weird stuff happens.
Not having it on screen, I kind of was like, people survive all kinds of random stuff. Right. But I also, found it fascinating that some people I think were kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, the ejector seat thing. But what I liked about that also was the fact that this is a person who, puts that in to basically say like, I've forgiven you. That's a forgiveness. Like all the stuff.
And they're rejecting their programming too. They're making a choice.
But his whole "you should have died, I hate you" kind of like the animosity was there, and given everything that's going on, it really made sense. But for him to put that in and say, you know what, this is important, like that, when you see it, there's more than just like rah 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 ending. There's also we all need to stick together to do that. We all need to live, and we're all going through this, and we're trying, like, let's not have you make that sacrifice. We're past the war now. Let's see what we can do. And that was like, wow, that it really, like, the beats keep getting hammered on, and I think that again, that's partially what
Well,
you could have done a more cynical thing, but does that make it better? And I think in the context of this movie, no.
Him going kamikaze on Godzilla, while could have been exciting, it would have been setting the wrong thing for his character, because this was about rejecting what his orders had been.
But it's not just that. It's the fact that the guy who's engineering the plane is puts in the ejector seat to say, you know what, I get it, and we need you here.
Yeah,
that
100%.
level of forgiveness. What's
Julia
funny,
had a rewrite that I thought was even more, that would have been better, and I'm certain that they considered and then rejected, which was obviously right there, which is, don't forget to pull this thing because it sets your bombs and you need to pull this thing. And it would have been interesting if he fully thought that he was sacrificing himself and the guy had given him, and the engineer
I
had
am
given him
glad
an
that it
ejector
was a conscious.
Yeah.
I think that
no, I think it was better that he actually makes the decision. I do think that
it's
it's giving him agency,
right.
and I think the things that we're all talking about, it's like that different, a lot of the ways I've seen this movie described as a movie that has heart, and I think that's the difference between a schmaltzy movie and a movie that has heart, is like all these beats feel earned, like it feels like you're following a character narrative that makes sense. They're all making decisions that again, there's there's a story arc going through, instead of a bunch of screenwriters doing what they think a audience is going, they're just trying to do something that they think the audience is going to like.
What's funny is the plane, just as a geeky thing for me, it looks like the plane that they make, which is an experimental plane, kind of based off of multiple things, actually reminded me of planes that come out after. There's the game series, the 1941, 1942, like the 1940X, I guess is the better way to describe this. The whole video games where you're in the war, and it gets kind of weird because it's from Japan, but you're attacking Japanese ships. But then it kind of expands into this whole thing, and there's but eventually you pick up these experimental plane, like as they made more of them. This looked exactly like, it almost looked exactly like, or was patterned off of one of these experimental planes in the 1940X series. So I looked at it, I was like, oh man, my geeky heart was done right by this weirdo prototype.
That's cool.
And it, it's interesting too, because this prototype plane that they kind of heard about, and then they have to repair, and where there is its own version of oxygen destroyer, or the Super X weapon in that they have these weapons, like, oh, we've heard of this. This is our sci-fi, is this plane, which but the difference is it plays into his we need you as a pilot to take this thing that's the right thing for the job, this prototype plane. But like I said, I thought it was cool because it reminded me of 1940X weaponry.
That is cool. I mean, apparently it's based on also a real plane with a rear mounted propeller, which is just really wild looking. It looks really, really cool.
It's based off of that. I mean, they took it from that 19 it starts with the 1942 games, but I think it's like I can't remember which were the 1940X games started having multiple planes, but one of those looks like, I have to look it up. I'll send you pictures, but I don't know, something about that, and also it being during this era, right? Like this series of games, like, oh hey, look, it's one. It looks like it comes from that. I don't know. That's my geeky side part of all of that.
I love it. All right, we should get to our final thoughts. We'll go in a different order this time. Let's start with Tony. Tony, I mean, how would you wrap this up? I know that we've had a wide-ranging conversation, but what are your final thoughts about Godzilla Minus One?
I mean, I think it lives up to the hype, but it's in so many ways. There's always going to be people who may disagree with that. right? Oh, it's overhyped. But and I'm the person, I'm going to go see a Godzilla movie regardless, right? Like I'm going to go back to the Godzilla We Love You Every Time book. So some I love more than others, but I think getting a Godzilla movie that is so close to also being, a best picture style movie is absolutely, like, I didn't expect that, but what a pleasant surprise. And it's just, all of it's up on the screen, just fantastic design, fantastic set pieces, looks beautiful, great actors, the chemistry's there. It's got the making of everything I like about movies. I'm really just really impressed. I wish that, I hope that cooler heads prevail and that they allow it to play longer. We'll see. I mean, who knows? There's a lot. I mean, studio release schedules and all of that, especially during holiday season, it's weird anyway, weird and political anyway, but it gets even more complicated during holiday season. Also, it's Toho, so a lot of it is also like, hey, you've got your MonsterVerse, like I'm not saying that they say this, but there has been in the past, like, yeah, man, America, sure, whatever, kind of, like this is a Japanese movie. We're gonna do what we want. Not saying that that's what has been said, but
what one would think that they would like making money.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that they just didn't want to gamble, that they were playing a little safer, and that that it gets a wider. I mean, it's competing with a bunch of stuff at once as well. Again, it's holiday season. I mean, plus there's like huge concert movies like the Beyonce movie, and that's got a good X amount of screens. Other stuff that's coming out. You got to do all that. But I want to see it again. I think it resonates in so many different ways, and I think it's up there with 84 in my opinion. 54 and 84, like, and I was just watching all the goofier ones because they were they're on Criterion and they're on Max, and I just put them on while I'm doing stuff recently. And but again, how cool is it that there's like you can go watch 2 shorts that came out for the anniversary. You're gonna get a MonsterVerse one, and we have this, which is just a quality movie. So it's like there's a little bit of something for everybody, in my opinion, and that definitely hasn't always been the case. I mean, when I was growing up, like, who cares about Godzilla? That's that goofy crap. So I'm stoked that we get to have these discussions, and hopefully it will lead to more people going, what's this? I've heard good things. Like, is this the Godzilla movie for me? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the fact that we're having these discussions, that's pretty cool.
That is awesome. Drew, what are your final thoughts on Godzilla Minus One?
It might be -1, but I think it's a 10 out of 10. Like, I really think that this is, again, not just a great Godzilla movie, but a great film. I agree with Tony that it is definitely up there. Like Tony said a really good thing about, like, I pause when people say it is the best Godzilla movie ever made, because I'm like, especially when you put it up against 84 or the original, which are both really, really good films. But it's definitely, I think I can comfortably say it is the best Godzilla movie made in this century. Like, I am okay with saying that. Like, it's really, really good. It's, there might be other ones that I would revisit more because of nostalgia factor. Like, I really do love the original, Ghidorah, the 3-headed monster. That's a personal favorite of mine. But this is just a fine film. The acting's great, the screenwriting's great. The effects are really good. The vision of post-war Japan is interesting. The time period is interesting. It's something that as Americans we haven't seen, explored as much. So I think, there's, even if it's, kind of an alternate history, because immediately, when you drop a giant monster into something, it immediately becomes, an alternate history thing. But, the idea of, and we didn't really talk about it as much, but the idea of a country without much of a military having to deal with this giant monster is just an interesting idea. And, I just really loved this movie, and I can't wait to see it again.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Julia, what are your final thoughts?
Honestly, just ditto to everything that's been said. It was really fantastic film. It's not one I'm going to forget. I usually forget movies pretty quickly, but I will remember this one. I love the complicated story and the visual effects and the music and all of it. Just great. So I highly recommend it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. All right. I have nothing to add to that. Because I've really enjoyed this. Let's get to our endorsements. Whatever you guys are watching or listening to that preferably in the genres. I'm the one who is most likely to deviate, and so I'll try not to. So what do you got for us? Drew, what are your endorsements?
So, speaking of franchises that have been around a long time and have found more mainstream success in the 21st century, those franchises that are the product of another country that have become popular in America, Tubi has added a bunch of vintage Doctor Who. And I have, going all the way back to the first Doctor. And I have been devouring those. I have been a Doctor Who fan since I was a little kid, although there's a bunch of gaps in my knowledge of it, because as science fiction fans of a certain age will know, that if prior to the 2005 reboot of Doctor Who, you kind of had to take what you could find on PBS at like midnight.
Yeah.
If you were watching Doctor Who in the 80s and 90s in America, that's kind of what had to happen. So, I am now filling in those blanks. I'm watching all kinds of Doctor Who serials, and I've bounced around. I've done, some Tom Baker. I've done some Patrick Troughton. I'm gonna get into the Davidson era. I'm getting one of my personal favorites. I've rewatched The Curse of Fenric with Sylvester McCoy. Like, there's just so much stuff. And if you're a horror fan too, I think it's important to note that if you are interested in like classic monsters, you can dig around and you can kind of find, here's the episode where Doctor Who does their take on vampires, and here's Doctor Who's take on the Yeti, and here's Doctor Who's Frankenstein episode. And so there's that. So I think that's part of the fun too, as a fan of not just sci-fi but also horror. Speaking of Tubi, today I watched a movie called Beyond the Living Dead, which is a Paul Naschy movie. It's from 1973, and it is best described as a Victorian melodrama zombie movie. One of the things that I've been doing a lot, over actually just like the last year, is I've been watching a lot of zombie movies that are, of course, 20th century zombie movies, but also before Resident Evil and before 28 Days Later, because I think after those two particular bits of pop culture, all zombie things became about the apocalypse.
Yes.
They were all meditations on the Romero trilogy of zombie movies, because those loom so large, I think, in a lot of people's imagination. What's interesting about this film is it's not that. It's about zombies, but it's very much like a, contained sort of Hammer style, here's people in period clothing, and there's this, sort of class drama going on. And there's also zombies. And
that sounds fantastic.
It's great, but also like I feel like I love George Romero. I'm a gigantic George Romero fan. I worship at the altar of George A. Romero, but I feel like we have lost some ingenuity in terms of the way we present this particular movie monster.
Well said.
And so I think this movie, as well as other movies of its type, are worth tracking down. So those are my endorsements this week.
That's really great. Thank you very much. I gotta look for that. Tony, what about you?
I'm gonna, I was surprised because I was watching some Tom Baker stuff on BritBox because we got a subscription for a little while. But the fact that you can go watch that stuff, because growing up, that was some real nerdy. I had like the Godzilla technical manual. I mean the Doctor Who technical manual and stuff. But that was some push you in the locker kind of stuff, along with D&D and all of it. So it was PBS. And I think it was later in the evening on Saturdays where I watched it when I was growing up. But I love the fact that Doctor Who's so popular now. That it's I like that it's mainstream or more mainstream. Like I like that people can access it. I think that's great. I don't want people to have to go through being ridiculed and or worse about geeky crap you like. So that's cool. I did see I did watch the new John Woo movie, Silent Night, and that was it's a lot of people. It's got a lot of reactions. A lot of them are, valid. I thought it was kind of fascinating. I'm not saying it's the best movie, but I thought that was pretty fascinating just to go see, hey, John Woo is back, It's at least an interesting movie to discuss, and a movie that, especially like John Woo's back, but he's also going to make a movie, a revenge, Death Wish style flick that has almost no dialogue, which is kind of fascinating. Also, I haven't finished it yet, but I'm really surprised that there is a Lupin adjacent, Lupin the Third adjacent live action movie based off of Daisuke Jian, his partner in crime. That there's actually like a live action movie, kind of it's a little bit. It feels a little looser, like as far as like, is it canon, is it not? I don't know. I haven't read up, but like I started watching it and it's kind of an interesting version of the character with some pretty crazy action sequences. Like I haven't had a chance to make it all the way through it, but that came out of nowhere for me. I guess I wasn't plugged in as much as I thought, but the fact that there's a live action Lupin side story movie, I don't know. That's the whole thing, is there's a lot of issues with streaming services.
Yeah.
But the fact that we have access to all this stuff is actually pretty cool when it works. I wish streaming services were what as they seem to be and promise to be, where it's a library, like this eternal library. That would be what I would prefer. But the fact that somebody decided to release this thing, that's pretty cool.
It's very cool.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some other stuff, but those are the two that like I recently caught. And you know what? If as far as interesting human interest movies go, I saw a screening a while back, but now that's out. Like, also, if you want the kind of dark, slightly darker, but like the dramatic human interest, like The Holdovers is also a really good film.
Awesome.
And that's a
I've been looking forward to that.
Yeah, you should definitely definitely really great cast. I thought it was great.
Julia, what do you got?
No, it's just funny that you guys both mentioned Doctor Who, and then neither one talked about the 60th anniversary, which is what I was going to endorse. So the Doctor Who's 60th anniversary was in November, and so they've been doing these 3 specials with David Tennant and Catherine Tate being back as the Doctor and Donna, and so they've aired the first 2, and then the third and last one will be this weekend, this Saturday, and then they'll start the new Doctor, which will be called Season 1, which is funny. But anyway, it's all on Disney Plus. But the specials have been really great, and the second one actually is horror. I mean, it's fantastic. It's just really I found them to be very, very entertaining, and especially for fans of David Tennant. You'll just love these, and they're just such a great. It's so fun to see them together again, and then we get the new Doctor sometime, I think at Christmas time or something, somewhere around there. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So if you are a Doctor Who fan, I'd highly recommend it. It's easy for us to watch now because it's on Disney. So anybody who has Disney Plus can watch it. And yeah, that's all.
Two things I did want to bring up that are coming out: the Sacrifice game. That's really, like, I saw that Fantastic Fest. Jim Wexler and crew did a great job. And also, if you want a kind of Gremlins-esque movie, you can catch There's Something in the Barn from Norway, and which actually some people I know were actually tangentially or were involved in it. Like, I saw the credits and did a little PSA when it was there at Fantastic Fest. But I love the kind of Gremlins-esque action in that. Both of those are on my, if you're looking for a horror, holiday horror kind of new stuff, I'm gonna go with those. Like, those are coming out. I think they're both coming out on the 8th, if I'm not mistaken, but I'll double check. We'll be on the lookout for the Sacrifice game, and There's Something in the Barn.
All right, everybody, have a fantastic week, and I'm sure we'll be back soon with something. So
Cool.
Everybody, be very kind to one another. Things are tough out there, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Night.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.